I spent 38 years in commercial plumbing. Not the glamorous kind, not the high-end remodels with Italian tile and heated floors, the unglamorous kind, hospitals, schools, apartment complexes. The kind of work where you crawl under buildings in the January cold and nobody thanks you for it, because when the pipes work, nobody notices the pipes. I know what it means to be invisible. I know what it means to hold things together from underneath while everyone else lives their lives above you, unaware of what's keeping everything from falling apart. I should have recognized that pattern in my own house a long time ago. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm 64 years old. I live alone now in a 2-bedroom house in Knoxville, Tennessee, and for the first time in longer than I can remember, I sleep well at night. Let me tell you why. My son's name is Derek. He's 31. His wife's name is Amber, and they've been married 4 years. My daughter is Cassie, 28, single, works in marketing, or says she does. And my wife of 33 years, the woman I met at a church potluck in 1991, is named Patricia. I want to be careful here. I'm not going to stand here and tell you my wife was a monster from the beginning. She wasn't. We had good years, real ones. When Derek was born 6 weeks early and spent 9 days in the NICU, Patricia didn't sleep. She sat in that hospital chair with her shoes on for 3 days straight, in case something changed. And she needed to move fast. I fell in love with her all over again watching that. But people change. Or maybe they reveal themselves slowly, over decades the way water damage reveals itself. One day the ceiling looks fine, the next day the paint is bubbling, and by the time you see the stain, the rot has been spreading for years. I retired 3 years ago. Good pension, solid 401k, and a paid-off house that I'd bought for $94,000 in 1997 and was now worth somewhere north of $380,000. I also had a rental property out in Maryville, a small house I'd purchased in 2009 when the market bottomed out and fixed up myself over 2 summers. It rented for $1,400 a month and had been steady for years. We were comfortable. I want to be clear about that. Not rich. Comfortable. The kind of comfortable that takes a lifetime of not being stupid with money. About 18 months ago, Derek and Amber started having trouble. I don't know the details and I didn't ask, because Derek is a grown man and grown men are entitled to their privacy. What I do know is that they came to us, to me and Patricia, and said they needed help. They were behind on their mortgage. They needed $22,000 to avoid foreclosure on the house we'd helped them buy the down payment for 3 years earlier. I wrote the check. I didn't hesitate. That's my son. 2 months later, Cassie called. Her lease was up and she wanted to move somewhere nicer. A newer apartment complex on the west side of town. Nicer gym, nicer pool. She needed first month, last month, and a security deposit. About $4,800. Patricia told me we should help her. I wrote that check too. And then, around the holidays, Derek and Amber came back. Amber's car had broken down. Not just a repair, a transmission replacement that the mechanic said wasn't worth doing on a car with 140,000 miles. They needed a car. They'd found a used Hyundai for $14,500. Could we help with the down payment? I remember sitting at my kitchen table looking at Derek while he explained this, and I remember thinking, when did this become normal? When did it become a given that I would solve this? But I looked at Patricia, and she was already nodding. And Derek was looking at me with that expression that sons learn early. The one that means, I know you'll do the right thing, Dad. And I wrote a third check. In 14 months, I had given my children just under $42,000. I'm not saying that to get sympathy. I'm saying it because it's context, because what happened next has to be understood inside that context. It was a Thursday in March when I first felt it, the tightening across my chest that I convinced myself was indigestion. I'd had a big lunch, Polish sausage, from a place near the hardware store where I'd gone to pick up some things for a small project in the garage. I took some antacids and went to bed early. By Friday morning, it was worse. Not crushing, not the Hollywood heart attack where you grab your arm and fall to the floor. Suppler. Pressure. Fatigue that felt different from regular tired. A feeling like someone had stacked something heavy on my sternum and walked away. Patricia was at her sister's house that weekend. An annual trip she took with her sister and 2 cousins, 4 days in Gatlinburg, something they'd done every spring for years. I called her Friday afternoon and told her I wasn't feeling right. She asked if I wanted her to come home. I told her not to overreact. I'd see how I felt in the morning. She said, okay. I should have pushed harder. She should have pushed harder too. By Saturday morning, I drove myself to the ER at University of Tennessee Medical Center because I couldn't convince myself anymore that it was the sausage. The woman at the intake desk took one look at the color of my face and moved me to a room fast. EKG, blood draw. A doctor with a young face and tired eyes who told me very calmly that I had experienced what they call a non-ST elevation, myocardial infarction, a heart attack, quieter than the dramatic kind, but serious. He said I needed to be admitted. He said I needed a procedure, a cardiac catheterization, to look at what was happening with the arteries around my heart. He said we should do it that night. I asked if I needed to call anyone. He said it would be a good idea. I called Patricia first. It was 9:40 in the morning. I know because I looked at my phone right before I dialed. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her what the doctor said. I told her where I was. I tried to keep my voice steady because I know how I am. I don't like to make people feel like I need them, even when I do. It's a flaw. I know that. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Derek and Amber's anniversary dinner is tonight. We made the reservation 2 months ago. I didn't say anything. She said, can they do the procedure tomorrow? I said I didn't think so, that the doctor said tonight. She said, let me call Derek and see what he thinks. I want you to sit with that for a moment. I had just told my wife of 33 years that I was in the emergency room, that I'd had a heart attack, that I needed a cardiac procedure that evening. And her first response was to call our son to see what he thought about the scheduling. I told her not to bother Derek. I said I'd figure it out. She said okay and that she'd check in with me later, and that she hoped I felt better. That was the conversation. The nurse came in a little while later to do more monitoring, and she asked if family was coming. I told her they were out of town. She nodded in that professional way nurses have, where they hear the whole truth behind the partial answer, but don't comment on it. I had the procedure that evening. The cardiologist found 2 blockages, one significant, one moderate. He placed 2 stents. I was in the cath lab for about 90 minutes and I remember looking up at the lights on the ceiling and doing something I hadn't done since I was a boy, which was pray. Not bargaining with God, not asking for things, just talking to Him the way you talk to someone when you're scared and you realize the distance between living and not living is smaller than you thought. The procedure went well. I was moved to a cardiac care room and told I'd be there at least until Monday. Nobody came that night. Nobody came Saturday. Derek texted me Saturday evening. Mom said you had some heart stuff. Hope you're doing okay, Dad. Crazy week. A thumbs up emoji. Cassie sent a gif of a cartoon bear holding balloons. Patricia called Sunday morning. She was still in Gatlinburg. She asked how the procedure had gone. I told her it went fine. 2 stents. Doctor said recovery would take some time. I should take it easy. She said she was glad it went okay. She asked if I needed her to stop at the store on her way back Monday. I told her no. She said, you know how you are. You don't like people fussing. And I thought, yes, you're right. I don't like people fussing. But there is a difference between fussing and showing up. And you taught me that difference by not showing up, and I am lying in a hospital bed 2 days after a heart attack, understanding it fully for the first time. I didn't say any of that. I said, drive safe. I had a lot of time to think in that hospital room. That's the thing about being still when you're a person who has never been still. The thoughts you've been outrunning for years catch up with you all at once. I thought about the $42,000. I thought about the fact that neither Derek nor Cassie had asked me once in the last 2 years how I was doing, and meant it, not in the way that means I want to know. Only in the way that means I want you to know, I asked. I thought about the way Amber looked at me at Christmas, the slight impatience whenever I didn't move fast enough through a conversation, like talking to me was an obligation she was getting through. I thought about the way Patricia had, over the years, slowly reorganized her life so that it revolved around our children and their spouses in a way that left me on the outer edge, included in the way a piece of furniture is included in a room, present but not particularly considered. I thought, when was the last time any of them asked me a question about my life and waited for the full answer? I thought, what would have happened if that procedure had not gone well? I knew the answer. There would have been grief, real grief. I don't doubt that. But there would also have been an estate to settle, a house worth $380,000. A rental property in Maryville, a 401k with a healthy balance, a life insurance policy I'd been paying premiums on for 22 years. They would have been sad, and then they would have been fine. On Sunday afternoon, I asked the nurse to find me a notepad and a pen. She brought me both, plus a cup of bad coffee that I drank anyway. I started making a list. Patricia came home Monday afternoon. She brought soup from a deli I like. And she was kind and attentive in all the right ways. And I watched her being kind and attentive. And I felt something I couldn't name at the time but understand now. I felt like I was watching a performance, not a cynical one, not a deliberately false one, a habitual one. The motions of caring without the substance of it. I was home by Tuesday. Doctor's orders were clear. Rest, medication, cardiac rehab starting in 3 weeks, no strenuous activity, follow-up in 10 days. I did not tell anyone about the list I had started making. I did not tell anyone that I had spent Sunday afternoon and Monday morning on my phone in that hospital room, reading things. About revocable living trusts, about the process for updating beneficiary designations on retirement accounts and life insurance policies, about what it means to change the name the insured on a homeowner's policy, about the difference between tenants in common and sole ownership on a real estate deed. I want to be fair here. I didn't make any decisions in that hospital room. I told myself, give it time. See what happens when you're home. See if things change. People are busy. People handle emergencies differently. Maybe this was a wake-up call for all of us. I gave it 3 months. In 3 months, Derek called me twice. Both times he needed something. Once to ask if I knew a good plumber in his neighborhood. I gave him a name. Did not charge him a referral fee. Did not mention the irony. Once to ask if I'd be willing to co-sign a refinance on his mortgage because his credit score had dropped. I told him I'd think about it. I thought about it for a week and told him I wasn't comfortable with it. Patricia got quiet when I told her about the co-sign refusal. Not angry. Quiet. Which in our marriage had always been worse. Cassie came over exactly once during those 3 months for Mother's Day. She brought Patricia flowers and took roughly 11 photographs of the flowers for her Instagram account. She asked me how I was feeling, and before I finished the sentence, I was telling her about the cardiac rehab, about how it was actually interesting, being in the gym with these other people who'd all had their scares. Her phone buzzed and she looked down at it and laughed at something. And when she looked back up at me, I could see she'd already moved on from the conversation. So I finished the sentence to myself and went to get a drink of water. 3 months after my heart attack, I drove to an estate planning attorney named Margaret Chen, whose office was on Kingston Pike. I'd found her through a referral from a former colleague. I brought a folder with my financial documents, deeds, account statements, beneficiary forms, the life insurance policy. Margaret was in her mid-50s. Methodical, not unkind, but not warm in a way that made the whole thing easier because I didn't feel like I needed to perform. I told her what I wanted to do. She asked me once, not in a judgmental way, but in the way attorneys are obligated to ask, "Are you sure?" I told her I'd had 3 months to think about it in a hospital room and at home, and I was sure. She said, "Okay, let's get started." The rental property in Maryville was the first thing I transferred. I'd been in contact with the property management company out of Oak Ridge for the last 2 months. A conversation I'd started quietly under the guise of looking for help managing the property now that I was slowing down for health reasons. The company was good. They took over management in April. I updated the deed in May, transferring sole ownership to a revocable trust I had established with Margaret's help, a trust that named my college roommate, a man named Phil who lives in Asheville and who has been my friend for 41 years, as the primary beneficiary. My 401k beneficiary was updated. My life insurance beneficiary was updated. The named beneficiary on both was changed from Patricia Ann to the trust. I set up a modest donor-advised fund at a community foundation in Knoxville, funded with a portion of my savings, designated for a scholarship at the vocational technical school I'd attended years ago. The place that had taught me how to read a blueprint, how to sweat a copper joint, how to build something that would last. I updated my will. I did not tell Patricia any of this. I want to address that, because I know how it sounds. We were still married. We still lived in the same house. She cooked dinner on most nights, and I washed the dishes, and we watched television in the same room and slept in the same bed. And I was quietly reorganizing the financial architecture of my life without telling her. Here is what I will say. She had had the opportunity to know who she was married to. 33 years of opportunity. She had found out in a hospital room in March, and she had decided that a dinner reservation was a more immediate concern. I did not feel that I owed her a preview of my own decisions. I had spent the better part of a decade prioritizing what other people needed from me. I was now, for perhaps the first time, doing something purely for myself. The house was the hardest decision, not emotionally. By that point, the emotions had settled into something quieter and more solid, something past grief and into clarity. Hard logistically, because we owned it together, jointly, and joint ownership is not simple to restructure. Margaret walked me through the options. One of them was filing for divorce. I filed in August. I had it served while Patricia was at her Tuesday morning book club, which I mentioned not out of malice, but because it meant she was surrounded by people she trusted when she found out, which seemed better than her being alone in the house. She called me 40 times in the 4 hours after she was served. I answered on the 41st call. I know that sounds cruel. I want to tell you why I did it. I needed her to understand that I was serious. I needed her to feel, in the space of those 4 hours, what it was like to reach for someone and find the other end of the line quiet. I needed her to know what those 2 days in the hospital felt like, stretched out. Not to be punitive, to be honest. When I answered, she was crying. She asked me why. I asked her if she remembered what she had said to me on the phone the morning I was admitted to the hospital. She didn't answer. I told her I remembered. I told her I had lain there that night before the procedure, thinking about the last 33 years and trying to balance the ledger, and that I was not angry, but that I was done. She said, "You're doing this over one bad decision?" I told her it wasn't one bad decision. I told her it was 33 years of small decisions that all pointed in the same direction. The heart attack had simply been the moment I could finally see the direction clearly. She asked about the house. I told her we'd work it out through the attorneys. She asked about Derek and Cassie. I told her they were adults and they'd be fine. She said, "They won't understand." I told her that was probably true, and that it wasn't my job to make them understand. My job for a very long time had been to be understood by them. That job had not worked out. I was retiring from it. Derek called me 2 days later. His voice was tight, not sad, tight, in the way that means the money calculations are already running. He asked me if it was true that I'd filed for divorce. I told him it was. He asked about the house. I told him the house was being handled through legal channels and would take some time to resolve. He asked about his inheritance. I'm not going to editorialize that. I'm just going to tell you that was the question. Not, "Dad, are you okay?" Not, "Dad, what happened?" The question was about his inheritance. I told him I had updated my estate documents and that Margaret's office would be in touch with information at the appropriate time. He said, "What does that mean?" I told him it meant what it said. Cassie called an hour later and cried on the phone, which was harder to sit through than Derek's call, because I still love my daughter, and love doesn't stop being real just because trust is gone. I let her cry. I told her I loved her. I told her that what I had decided had nothing to do with my love for her, and that I hoped one day she'd understand the difference between being loved and being taken for granted. She asked if she could come over. I told her not yet. I told her I needed some time. She asked how long. I told her I didn't know, but that when I was ready I'd call. The divorce was finalized in December. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, which means the marital assets were divided fairly, not equally, and the circumstances, including my documented contributions to the marital estate versus Patricia's and the financial transfers we had made to our children over the years, factored into the settlement in ways that Margaret had anticipated. I came out of it with a house, which I kept. Patricia received a settlement that gave her a fair start. She moved to Maryville to be closer to Derek and Amber. I hear she's doing okay. I don't wish her badly. I genuinely don't. I hope she has a life that she's proud of. I hope she thinks sometimes about what it cost her. The rental property continues to generate income, now managed by the trust. Phil sends me a fishing report from Asheville about once a month along with occasional trust updates, which is the most Phil thing possible and makes me smile every time. I started cardiac rehab in the spring and finished in the fall. And I have to tell you something about cardiac rehab that nobody tells you. It's one of the most purely human experiences I have ever had. You are in a gym with 8, 10, 12 other people who have all had their moment of reckoning, their morning on the table, their look at the ceiling lights. The chatter before and after the exercises is unlike any other conversation I've had. People say true things. They don't perform. A retired school teacher from Lenoir City named Gloria told me on my 4th session that the best thing her heart attack did for her was give her permission to stop pretending. I think about that a lot. Derek and I have a relationship now. It is different from what it was, less frequent, more honest. We had one long conversation in January in a diner on Clinton Highway that lasted 3 hours and covered more ground than the previous 5 years of our relationship combined. I told him things I should have said when he was 20. He told me things I needed to hear. We left the diner and stood in the parking lot, and he hugged me, a real hug, and said, "I'm sorry I asked about the inheritance." I told him I was glad he did. I told him it had clarified things. He's doing better. He and Amber are in counseling. He got a promotion at work. He calls me now, not when he needs something. Just to call. Last week, he called me to tell me a joke he'd heard. A bad joke. I laughed anyway because the joke wasn't the point. Cassie and I are still finding our way. She came for Thanksgiving, just the two of us, and she helped me cook and we ate and watched football and it was quiet in a way that was almost comfortable. Before she left, she stood in the doorway and said, "I should have come to the hospital, Dad." I told her, yeah, she should have. She said, "I don't know why I didn't." I told her I thought she did know, and that when she was ready to look at it, it might be worth looking at. Not for me, for herself. She nodded. She didn't argue. That's progress. I want to finish with this because I think it's the part that people don't usually say. I don't think I handled everything perfectly. I kept secrets from my wife for months, and while I believe I had my reasons, I know there was a way to do it with more honesty, and I didn't choose that way. I chose to protect myself, and there's a difference between protecting yourself and being brave. I was protecting myself. I want to own that. I think I should have spoken up years earlier. I think I should have told my children the first time they came to me for money that I would help them. But that help was not the same as a lifelong guarantee. I think I should have had harder conversations with Patricia when the distance started growing instead of chalking it up to the way marriages get when kids grow up and routines calcify. I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. That's on me. But here is what I know. At 64 years old, lying in this house in Knoxville that I own alone and have painted 3 rooms of in the last 4 months because I finally have time to do the things I've been meaning to do, I know the difference between being loved and being needed. For a long time, I mistook the second for the first. I know now that those are not the same thing, and that accepting the second in place of the first is a long, slow way to disappear. I'm not disappearing anymore. That's enough. That's actually everything. There's something that happens when you survive something you weren't sure you'd survive. The noise gets quiet. Not the world's noise. That keeps going just fine without your input. I mean the internal noise. The justifications, the rationalizations, the little voice that says they're just busy, or that's just how Derek is, or Patricia shows love differently. After my procedure, that voice went mostly silent. What was left was just a plain shape of things. I had given 38 years of physical labor. 33 years of marriage, and somewhere north of $42,000 in the last 14 months alone. What I had received in return, at the moment it counted most, was a text with a thumbs up emoji and a question about whether I needed anything from the store. I'm not telling you that to generate sympathy. I'm telling you because I think a lot of people reading this know exactly what that ledger looks like, and they've been carrying it quietly, the same way I did, telling themselves it balances out somewhere they just can't see yet. It doesn't balance out on its own. That's the thing nobody tells you. The people in your life will take what they're given at the level they're given it, and they will call that love. And they will believe it, and they won't change the equation until the equation changes on them. I spent decades thinking that if I just kept being steady, kept showing up, kept writing checks, kept being the load-bearing wall, eventually they would see it and be grateful. What I learned in a cardiac care room in Knoxville is that invisible things don't get seen until they disappear. When I disappeared, when the accounts changed and the documents were redrawn and Derek's first question was about his inheritance, I finally understood what the previous 30 years had actually been. Not a family held together by love and effort. A system held together by my willingness to absorb whatever it needed and ask for nothing back. The moment I stopped absorbing, the system revealed what it was made of. Here is what I want to say to anyone who recognizes themselves in this: the choices you make in how you treat people who love you are not neutral. They accumulate. Every time Derek called, only when he needed something. Every time Cassie looked at her phone mid-sentence. Every time Patricia chose the comfortable answer over the true one. Those were not small moments. They were investments in a particular kind of relationship, and eventually that relationship paid out exactly what had been deposited into it. That's not punishment. That's just arithmetic. What I'm prouder of than the decisions I made about money and property is the decision I made about honesty with myself first. That I stopped pretending the distance between us was something that would close on its own. That I looked at what was real instead of what I wanted to be real. That took more out of me than 38 years of crawling under cold buildings ever did. I talk to Derek now. I'm finding my way back to Cassie. I don't know what Patricia's life looks like, and I hope it's good. I paint rooms in my house on weekday afternoons, and nobody needs anything from me, and I sleep well. That's not a small thing. For a man who spent most of his life being invisible while holding everything up, being seen, even just by himself, turned out to be the only inheritance worth keeping.